trends in housing units and housing size. I'm still having difficulty correlating all that.
You should let them know that you're on TV.
But, so I think those were essentially the subjects of that email.
Okay. Yeah, Eric was on vacation last week.
Okay.
Well deserved. And so I will. I haven't followed up with him on that stuff yet, but I will do.
Okay.
Beware.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're live on TV, so.
Okay, we're live on TV now, gentlemen.
We're just waiting.
waiting for, I think we need one more person to have a quorum. And Rick, are you there?
I am.
Ah, there you are. Good. Okay, we need one more. There he is.
Oh, has Rick been here? Do we still need one more?
Maybe we don't. One, two.
We have a good evening in front of us. It looks like for a minute there, it looked like we had two Ricks. Now the evening's going downhill because you got two Jims.
Yes.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know.
5 should do it.
I think five.
Five
do it.
should do it, and so Rick, if Marnie's not here, you still count, don't you?
Who, me?
You.
Yes, and I guess in my current version, yes.
Okay.
At least for the beginning of the meeting.
Okay. It is 6:05, there being a quorum present. Let's just take the roll and kick it off properly. We'll start with Emil on the right flank,
Emil Dahlquist here.
Jack Lawrence here.
Kristen Kasner, here.
Dave Wenger, present.
Rick Mitchell, present.
Oh, two presents.
Yes, I bring presents.
How have you twinned yourself? We've got a virtual as well, two virtual.
Yeah, it's my evil twin.
Oh my God. It was bad enough the way it was before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's going to get a lot worse.
All right. Well, we've had some changes of the guard in the interim since our last meeting. And Rick will be introducing a new subject, a new member there. And Rosie will continue. She doesn't seem to be with us at the moment, but the selectmen decided that she would stay on, and then they will appoint a member, a representative from the select board as well. So, Rick, you have the floor.
Sure, thank you, Jack. Just wanted to update everybody, may know this already. At the last meeting, the planning board, there was a change in leadership, and Marnie Crouch is now chairperson, and she will be taking my place on the steering committee as the chair of the planning board. That's one of the designated seats. So, her email, she's in the Canary Islands and was hoping to connect via Zoom, but I guess is unable to do so. But she will be the official planning board representative going forward.
So the thing to know about Marnie Crouch is that she's not coming to us as a novice. She is not only a member of the planning board, but also, I believe still, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, which brings an important element, I think, onto our committee, which I think would be a very useful addition. We have, I believe, Monday night, we will have the new appointee from the select board. So we'll see who that is. So at this point, we have one visitor to our jolly group here, and has requested a 3-minute.
Oh, I'm foregoing that, actually.
Are you foregoing that?
Yes, I am, yeah. I'm just listening to it.
Okay, I've got one other administrative matter. I've read all of the materials, Jim, And I have a personal grouch about something, and that is
Okay.
that it refers in many cases to people living in South Hamilton. And for the record, there is no such place as South Hamilton. Hamilton is a town with 2 post offices and 2 zip codes. And the 2 zip codes are Hamilton, which is 01936, and then there's the delivery boxes and P.O. boxes, which is the South Hamilton Post Office, 01982. So there are 2 zip codes, 2 post offices, but only 1 town. So if we could just make sure that all of our drafts refer to the town only as Hamilton, I'd be just ever so happy.
Yep, no problem, no problem. And if somehow or another we mess up on that and leave 1 or 2 Souths in there, please, and I'm sure you won't, don't hesitate to let us know so we can eliminate them.
Yeah, that's one of my bad traits is my mouth just keeps rolling. And I was amazed that I think there are a number of people even in the surveys who think they live in South Hamilton. And I don't know that this will disabuse them of that, but anyway, that's the situation. So,
Jack, before we go forward, does the planning board change mean that Rick is no longer to participate on the steering committee?
that's correct, but I've been very clear with him that he doesn't elude us from an information source and as an institutional memory, and I know where he lives, so I know we can always access his wisdom when needed.
Well, I'd recommend if you and Rick were amenable that he remain in some capacity. I think we would learn from his prior experience and his general knowledge of both Hamilton and North Hamilton and South Hamilton.
Well, we certainly intend to continue to do these dual sessions, and I would hope that we would have his smiling visage up on the screen or present. And it's clear that he's always welcome to say anything he'd like to say.
Yeah, and I think that the select board would need to sort of weigh in on that, because as they did with Rosie, they would need to make their voice and agreement known. I can't represent the planning board. That's Marnie's job. But I'm happy on occasion to stick my nose in where, as I said to Jack, it might not be welcome, but and opine when necessary. But I need to take a step back, and Marnie is going to fill that role.
Well, perhaps, Jack, just to put this to rest, if you and the rest of the committee are willing, I'd recommend that an overture be made to the select board so that we can continue to benefit from Rick Mitchell's expertise.
Well, as you know, this is an open meeting. He can certainly attend any meeting he wishes. The only thing the select board would add to that would be to give him a vote. And I don't know that we want to do that.
Yeah, you probably don't. And I would prefer not to.
Yeah.
I think that's Marnie's role, and I think you've got enough expertise on the board, so I'm happy to stand back and opine, but the 9-member board gets to vote, and I'm no longer a member of that, given the change on the planning.
All right, I withdraw my exaggerated comments.
I do think there's something to be said for consistency in this process, though, so I think it is important for you guys to stay involved as started from the beginning with us, in whatever capacity you're comfortable.
Okay.
Well said. Okay, let's roll. Jim, it's
Got it.
Over to you.
Cool.
Recording in progress.
I am currently disabled to share my screen, so if I could be enabled, that would be great. And while that's happening, I wanted to let you know, I brought along a couple of colleagues tonight, Mr. Cassidy Croust and Ms. Lainey Cohen. And Cass, I believe, is going to be presenting a little bit later this evening. He and Lainey have been working on the open space and recreation element. There we go. I'll let the echo dissipate. And so he and Lainey have put together a nice PowerPoint for the evening to show what they've been finding. And with that,
One element I might just comment if I could.
I'm sorry?
I might just comment on one point. Whoa. Am I too close to the mic?
There we go.
Ah,
Oh,
excellent.
Wow, much better. No, as a kid, I really used to like Space 1999, and this sort of reminds me of that.
What, just one comment apropos of open space and recreation. I've been reading surveys, and there was a comment on one survey and a point I want to clear up for anybody who may be attending or listening to this session, and that is they said that all of these trails on private property around town are only accessible by somebody sitting on a horse. This is not true. The trails are accessible by anybody on foot, on bicycle, on skis, depending on the season, and I use them every day, and I have not been on a horse in some years now. So I just want that point out there that these trails are for the enjoyment of people who love open space as I do and who want to enjoy it on lovely days like today, because today was absolutely spectacular. So that's my one comment on open space and recreation.
Cool. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So master plan, and we're master plan meeting today, of course, and we're going to spend some time with action planning and also open space and recreation, as I mentioned a moment ago. So here is sort of an abbreviated agenda. I'm actually going to drag over, I think yeah, good. The computer let me do what I wanted. Whoops. The fuller agenda. Okay. So we'll begin, of course, with the opening and agenda review, which we're doing now. Project status report, we'll take a few minutes to do that. I'll update you on where things stand with the public survey and the website status, as well as some hard copy survey data that we've received recently and that we're working on getting entered in. Cass and Lainey will present on the open space and recreation existing conditions. We'll talk about the Google documents and what we have, what we've added up there currently in the comments that we've received on these, as well as there are a couple other, since this agenda was put together, there have been a couple other things that have been, I don't know, posted to the website as well. And there are a few others that are coming that we'll talk about too. We'll do that action workshop that we've been talking about. I'm really excited to say we've gotten some good comments, some good ideas for actions that we'll want to share with you, and hopefully the folks who put those together will be willing to offer their thoughts on the actions that they included. We'll confirm the next meeting date and agenda at the end of the meeting, although of course it's planned for May 12th at 6 o'clock. And in this agenda, we have a list of key agenda items for the 12th, as well as our plans for homework going forward here. And then other committee business we have down as item 7, and we'll take a few minutes at the end for that. Before I go on, is there anything that anybody wants to add or comment on in the agenda? All right, hearing nothing, we'll continue along. Status report. So I'm going to update the status report and post it to the Google Drive. Sent these around previously, of course, but just in general, recent updates. So we now have several draft chapters posted. They include land use. Economic development is coming. That shouldn't be in there yet. It's on its way. Natural resources, cultural resources and historic, community services and facilities, and transportation. And as you all know, there is a comment tracking sheet that's in there. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and it allows folks to add comments and share those. We've gotten a bunch of good comments, as I mentioned, on some of these sections so far. Mostly the comments have been from, well, I think maybe entirely, they've been from Emil and Dana. They've been getting the Gold Star Award for their work on homework and so on. We've gotten a couple other emails along the way that included other comments that are very helpful too. But we look forward to getting comments from the other members, as soon as that's convenient for people. As you know, there's been homework provided to all of you folks. We've just gone over a little bit about survey data. So we have 239 survey responses so far. I think that's pretty good, a good number given the size of the town. And of these, I think about 68 of them were paper copies that we're adding in. The rest are surveys that were completed on SurveyMonkey. Last time I checked, I think that number was 171. So if my math is good, that adds up to 239. Anyways, like I say, I think that's a pretty good response to the survey so far. That's been up for I think about 3 weeks now.
And
We've got a
Jack,
few
how
more.
many do you have in here? Do you know?
I didn't count them, but there's
20.
probably at least another 20 or 30 in there.
Okay, so we have additional paper copies, and then I know I asked Dana at the last meeting to coordinate with superintendent for the superintendent's report that goes out tomorrow to do one last push for the online survey, and hopefully others on the committee can do kind of that Facebook and town website push, and we'll keep it up for, we can decide another week or 2 weeks, or, until our next meeting. We should say whatever that date is, though. That we're having it up for, do it now, because it's gonna be closed soon.
Well, it'll be May 12th plus, the next, May 12th plus a week is May 19th?
Yeah, or we could
No, it'd be
do the push this week and say it's open till May
26th.
12th.
May 6th, May 12th, okay. Or 26th, which, those will be the next two
I
meetings.
feel like that's too long.
Too long, is that, okay, May 12th?
When you send it out, people are either gonna do it in a couple of days or not.
Yeah.
And then if we can just have the boards that are meeting over the next week to say, hey, there's a survey, please fill it out, like for an announcement.
Good,
Does that sound good?
yeah.
Cool. Anything else about status report before I move on?
I think the only other thing, the point that I made with you, Jim, and that was that I was a little disappointed that the land use data baseline is basically 2005 with some data from 2025, and 2016. And the 2005, of course, fairly coincides with the last master plan that we did. And it's a little discouraging that we don't have more current data because Hamilton has not been a static place in the interim. I think personally my feel is that Hamilton has changed a good deal demographically and so forth in the last 6-7 years. And I had hoped that we would have data from the 2020 census. Jim explained to me that that is just not, unfortunately, not available. So that is one point that's a disappointing aspect, unfortunately, for this master plan.
Yeah, if I can add to that a little bit, Jack. So in the 2020 census, of course, there is, lots of good demographic data, and that gets incorporated into the plan, as well as other, related data, excuse me, that RKG, that Eric and Chris were able to pull from proprietary sources that they have. The census data is, of course, public. Unfortunately, or I don't know if unfortunately is exactly the right word, but the 2020 census, it's not a tool for collecting land use data. That's not what the Census Bureau does. The way that we get land use data is through the state, and the state has consistently, every few years, it's not real regular, it's maybe roughly every 10 years or so, sometimes maybe more like 15, updates their land use data. And their most recent updates include 2005 and 2016. They haven't done one since 2016. There are some that go back historically to I think the late 80s. The issue with the unfortunate issue with the 2016 data is that they collected it and categorized it very differently than they did the 2005 data. And they've done this in such a way that it's not like they split out the existing categories and provided a more granular product. What they did was switched around how different things were incorporated into the different categories, and they changed the categories altogether so that 2005 and 2016, those data sets are essentially not comparable.
Yeah.
You can't get trend data out of them. So this is an unfortunate thing. I know this has been an issue for other communities doing master plans. We're actually reaching out to Mass GIS to see if they have a proposed way to, address this issue. The best that we've been able to do is sort of a complex explanation that, frankly, isn't appropriate for most readers. Complex explanation of what the different data source or different data categorizations mean and how it changed from 2005 to 2016. I will tell you, as somebody who's pretty seasoned with land use data, I read it and it's, not just that I read our text, but I look at the data and I find it extremely confusing how to compare these two things. So I would expect that, most everybody else does, except maybe the GIS people at Mass GIS. So that's why we're reaching out to them, hopefully trying to figure out some way to get at a, better result than we currently have.
Jim, can I, while we're on land use, can I just jump in here?
Of course.
How difficult would it be to come up with data that compares Hamilton's percentage of land dedicated to preserved open space with other communities in the immediate area?
I have to talk to our GIS folks about that and just take a look and see how big an effort that is.
I think that certainly would be helpful to sort of put in perspective where we are relative to other communities that are demographically, regionally similar. within the probably a 10, 15, 20 mile range, just to understand where we stand in terms of percentage of preserved open space.
Mm-hmm. So are you just looking for like a total amount of open space comparison or something more detailed than that?
No, what you just said is
Okay.
total preserved open space. Evidently, it's a data point that seems to be common because I was reading an article about this and recently in a paper. I don't remember which one, and they were talking about different community and the percentage of open space. So it seemed like a data point that come from somewhere that I hope is easily accessible.
Okay. If we, assuming that we're able to do this and it's not that big a deal, what communities would you most like to see on the comparison list?
Well, I think certainly, I would pick like Ipswich, Wenham, Topsfield, Oxford, maybe Rowley, Georgetown, something. People may have other thoughts on that. I'm just thinking, how do we compare to our immediate or secondary abutting communities?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Jack, if I may, after our last meeting, after Eric's presentation, I emailed Patrick for forwarding to Jim some follow-up questions I had. One did involve the appropriate comparative universe. I suggested perhaps instead of Essex County, which of course captures larger cities, etc., that we concentrate on contiguous communities. And I also asked, through Patrick, to again deal with what I viewed as the apparent inconsistencies between population decline in Hamilton and the data regarding the increment in housing units and housing size, etc. And apparently Eric is away, but I would look forward to answers to those, perhaps at the next meeting.
Jim, can I just, Jim and David, can I share just a data point? The town clerk pointed out to me the disparity with the decline in population in Hamilton. That was primarily due to the decline in student population at Gordon Theological Seminary that dropped by 30% since the last census.
Well, we'll certainly consider that. I'd like to see what's happening in other communities,
Yep.
especially those that are more reasonably compared to us.
Okay. Let me see what we can do along those lines.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's see. I think we should move on from the status report now. We probably covered it pretty well anyways. And get to Cass and the open space and recreation existing conditions. Cass, I'm going to stop sharing and let you share your screen.
Thanks, Jim. My name is Cass Crost. I'm a landscape architect with Weston and Sampson. I did recently hurt my shoulder, so I'm a little slower. My one advice to you is to not wear socks on wood stairs. They can hurt you. I do have the screen sharing disabled for me as well, if you wouldn't mind enabling that, please. There we go. All right, bear with me here. Can you all see that? Just fine.
Yep.
All right, great. As I said, my name is Cass Crost. I'm a registered landscape architect, working at Weston and Sampson, doing all different things in terms of master planning, design, construction. I am based out of Boston, but I do live in Essex, so I'm nearby, and I frequent Hamilton a lot. And also, I do play basketball a fair bit in the library. So I'm happy to be excited and part of this project as well. So thanks for having me today. Down here as well, Lainey Cohen, she's the one that's been helping me. She's from our design team. She's off to the side, just kind of taking notes. She can chime in if needed. But let's just cruise on through. All right, so topics to be covered today. Essentially what we're gonna do is really work to define what open space is. We all understand what we're dealing with, define the protection status, and what the different categories of that are, and also define recreation and how that is different. And how that plays out here. And so after that, we'll talk about some of the existing conditions as they relate to ownership, different protection, and also active recreation facility inventory and those locations and things. As well, we want to touch on community engagement and how we've been involved in that so far, and some of the things some of the takeaways that we've had out of that process already. We do know that the online survey is still working and still in process, so we look forward to kind of receiving more information from that. And then finally, we'll kind of start to wrap up with some of the identified community issues and opportunities, somewhat of which are responding to some of the things we've heard in person in the public meeting, but also in the online survey as well. So there will be Q&A at the end, so please feel free to ask questions at that point. First off, to define open space, I'm going to do the one thing that I hate. I'm going to read the definition off my screen. I know you all can read very well too. But essentially refers to conservation land, forest land, agricultural land, active recreation, passive, green buffers that are kind of sizable. And then this open space does vary by ownership, different protections, and also the primary use. And within that, there are different protection status definitions as well in perpetuity, which is what it sounds like. But that talks about lands that are owned by the town's conservation commission or by the water department for water zone, well issue, things like that. If there's in perpetuity conservation restrictions on a property, Article 97, which is things that are owned by the state conservation agencies, of which you guys have a sizable amount of property in that category. And other things in terms of basically if you've received federal or state assistance for purchase or improvement of a property in terms of grant funding. And then there's limited, which is exactly what you think, where it is just, it's protected through different legal mechanisms, but they do have limitations to it. It's not in perpetuity in that regard. There is Chapter 61, which is not in perpetuity, but it's also, it can go away. I think that's the important takeaway here. There's 3 different categories within that. Standards Chapter 61 is for forests, 61A is for agriculture, and then 61B is for recreation land. And essentially what that means is they're getting tax benefits for being there, which means it's kind of protected, but there is an opportunity for the property owner to unwind that Chapter 61 status, but they would have to pay back any tax benefits that they've been received, so the town would recover that back. But that is something to make note of if that's out there. That open space could change in its status of protection. You don't have a ton of that, but there is some, and we have a map of that later. And then of course none, which means that they're just pretty much open, privately owned, and can change hands and kind of be developed as appropriate in terms of zoning and other developments like that. Recreation, we've defined that into 2 different categories, passive and active. Passive, low intensity recreation, it's not really formal, doesn't need formal facilities, but it's things like bird watching, hiking, walking, horseback riding we have in that category as well. And these typically often occur in protected lands, open spaces like that are protected in that regard from conservation lands. Active recreation, think high intensity, think Patton Park, things like that, where there's basketball courts, athletic rectangular fields, ball fields, swimming pools, things like that. And then jumping into ownership, this is a map that kind of identifies the different types of ownership that you have. We have DCR in the dark red, the different land trusts, like the Ipswich River Wild Sanctuary here down below, if you can see my mouse. Also Appleton Farms up here. We do have the Bay Circuit long distance trail here noted on here. We included a map that shows all the different bridle trails and things like that, but there are a significant amount of those in town. Also municipal in the dark kind of blue purple, and then private is the mauve color. And then other as well, it's basically the high school property, which is town Wenham School District property. And in terms of the largest parcels, which is something to note, this is a quick breakdown on just basically the top 5 big hits of who is this. And you can see that it's almost a third. These 5 incorporate about a third of the total land area of the town of Hamilton. The Ipswich Wildlife Sanctuary, protected in perpetuity. I think you can notice that that's the most important thing to take away here of these top 5 is they are all protected in perpetuity. So that will kind of protect that land and that character that it brings with it. Appleton Farms, 529 acres, beautiful space. Bradley Palmer, also a great place to go. I go there frequently. Myopia Hunt Club, they don't let me in, but I've heard it's beautiful. Shabako Woods, also great. I go there frequently. At 229 acres, it is 5% of the town. So
Cass,
also down below. Oh,
Cass, can I just make one
Cass,
comment,
can I
please?
interrupt for a second?
sure.
I don't see Sagamore Hill on
Yeah, that's what I was
this
going to say.
list.
Yeah, we had to be judicious in terms of that. The list could be very extensive. We can incorporate a whole full table that's there. We just want to kind of identify the top keys.
Okay.
In terms of size, we had to draw the line somewhere. But yes, there's a lot of other sizable owners in town for sure to be noted. And that's one of those things where I think later you go on, we can have that full list to show kind of what's there and who owns what, I think, when there's more space available. Same here again, the largest owners, Mass Audubon, 15%. Again, there's other owners as well, large property owners, but we wanted to kind of keep it to the top hit list here. You can see that town of Manchester, that actually relates to the water protection area down to the southeast. And then 5% is the town of Hamilton municipal owned. So something to note there that is important to say in terms of the division of ownership in terms of the size of space and how much the town of Hamilton owns 5% of that. And what the thinking there is the control and who owns the maintenance of that. So just something to keep in mind. And then in terms of open space protection, here's a map that kind of shows you how that divides in. A nice thing here is that almost a strong majority of this is protected in perpetuity, which I think is great. And you guys should take pride in that as well. I know that you guys have done, I think the last OSRP was done, we'll talk about that later, was done in 2008, completed. I know the other one's in the process, but I know that since that was implemented, you guys did follow that roadmap and made some great progress on some of the action items within that plan. So kudos to that. I don't need to go through all this, but you can see this area down here. That's the kind of that town of Manchester where there's this water protection. Also same as over here. This is DCR properties as well in that dark blue. And the conservation is in this darkish green there. So lots of protection around here.
Cass, I think you left out Greenbelt on your list.
Yeah, make sure that gets in there. I see that. We do have Sagamore up here, just as a note from the.
Well, the Sagamore Greenbelt, and more recently, Greenbelt has taken over the Patton, a big chunk of the Patton property. So that's material.
Yep.
And they've got a lot of other rights of way and things like that, but I think they actually own the Patton.
That's great. We'll dive into that. I think as we dive into those things, I'd love to kind of dig into the details there offline about that. I think that's great information to have and make sure we have the most up to date and we can update all these items in respect to that. Chapter 61 land to note. Essentially, here's your kind of, I think these are horse fields up in this area, if I remember correctly. Also agricultural spaces. And then recreation. This is horse farms, it's under recreation, but you could also consider that as passive recreation, as we call that by our definition. You can see the total acreages here. And then looking in terms of how that relates to the town of Hamilton as a whole, Again, the total land area here is 9,536 acres. Total protected land, the none is a misnomer. That's something we're working through with GIS there, but it doesn't mean none in terms of the protection level, but it's more of a different name status. But you have just over 4,000 acres that are protected in some form or fashion, not including the Chapter 61. So you're roughly about 43% of your total land area that is protected, which other comparable towns, I know that that's pretty sizable. So again, that's a good thing for you guys. Active recreation facility inventory, just giving these things. You can see there's kind of a hub down here, more towards the downtown area. South Hamilton, which is not actually South Hamilton, but just the area of this, it is south in Hamilton. Also, this includes the town of Hamilton Wenham High School area as well. And we did include Bucher Elementary in this list as well, which actually is in Wenham, but I know that you guys do have partnership with Wenham in terms of the recreation department. And so it's important to include that in the thinking as well. Again, here's the full list of facility inventory that we have. Chabaco Lake Town Landing and Beach. I love it there. Cutler Elementary School, sports field, you can kind of see what different things are there. Patton Park, Hamilton Wenham High School, Pingree as well, Donovan, Fairfield, Bucher. And I think then jumping into community engagement, this is just kind of going to some of the things that we kind of cherry picked some of the open space and recreation related items that we came away from in that meeting. And really they showed an eagerness for increased bike lanes throughout town. There's basically that pedestrian circulation and mode of transportation to get around, particularly on bikes. I think that's something to think about if that's a protected bike lane or if it's a share road type of intervention. But also they want to do increased sustainability efforts. They also want to, they're interested in diversifying the types of recreation that are out there. Just as an example, in terms of an active recreation, pickleball, I'm sure, I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's one of the fastest growing sports in the country. If you haven't heard about it, I'm sure you will. They're popping up everywhere. I actually saw my first one in like just somebody's yard the other day. So impressive to see that in terms of how much traction that's getting. And also that they do just love most residents, really you'll see it over and over again in a lot of the survey correspondence, is they love the character, the feel, the charm of the town in terms of its open space, its farms, its horse farms, and its forested lands as well. So kind of the takeaways of some of those comments, basically bump up some of that green infrastructure that you guys can have and create new outlets that drive a more sustainable culture. Things like stormwater mitigation, infiltration, things like that. Create new passive and active recreation opportunities for a wider range of people. We'll talk about some of that a little more in detail a little bit for later, just down this presentation. But really just protect the town's rural character is what they want to do. And you guys are active and have been active in that effort over the years. Key survey results that are kind of preliminary so far, just to give you a kind of wet your whistle, if you will, is what attracted you to Hamilton. Number 1 is schools. Number 2 is open space. And number 3 is character. Which topics are the most important? Again, schools, drinking water supply, that's been a consistent theme throughout a lot of your master plans and open space and recreation plans historically. Active recreation is important. What do you want to see more of? I think it's the maintenance of what you guys have is an important aspect of people's thinking, is to say what we do have, we want to see it performing at a high level and service residents well. 51% said they want to protect the natural resources and open space. And then 46% is protect the active recreation areas. Some of the community issues that we have that we've identified that we think are kind of some of the higher up on the priority list. You guys do have an out-of-date recreation master plan that is, the last one was completed in 2012. And what that means is just that guiding document is aged and dated. Things like just interests and evolution of recreational pursuits always is a changing thing. So it's always great to kind of reassess that over time. And what that'll do is that'll kind of reset some of the roadmap of how you guys can think of what the community needs are. And I think that's just, it would include like a robust community process to really figure out how they feel about the current facilities that are active to date, but also perhaps if they're meeting the needs that they need and want. Also, I think some of the things you can think about is confirming ADA compliance. I know that's always something that's of interest for folks. As you make improvements, you always need to kind of make sure you're doing kind of your best to become ADA compliant, just to increase accessibility and use of spaces by all people of all abilities. You also have an out-of-date open space and recreation plan. The last one was approved. I use that keyword approved in 2008. They do require, the state does require that to be updated every 7 years in order to qualify for grant funding with the EOEEA in the state, basically your CPC funding that'll unlock that in terms of state matching. Identification of key parcels for protection could be out of date or unknown. So I think that you guys use that 2008 document very well, and I think doing an update will set you well into the future as well in terms of what the next steps would be for the town of Hamilton in terms of open space protection and things like that. Maintain clean water supply resources. That's a theme that's consistent throughout and as well currently today in some of the survey stuff. Basically maintain and improve those recharge areas, minimize the risk of contamination. There's a lot of stuff going on out there. There's a lot of testing for PFAS and things like that, just to be aware of. And that's just something to keep in mind as you make developments and think about that. Maintain and expand ecological resources. Mental note that that's a misspelling, and I'm sorry about that. But protect ecological connections to maintain and enhance biodiversity. So basically, wildlife, fauna, connections between open spaces are critical. You guys do have a lot of protected open space that do that, but I think you guys are also a key corridor to connecting to those open spaces in your adjacent towns as well. So it's an important aspect. Also, just management of some of the protected parcels. They are under the jurisdiction of owners of other people other than the residents of Hamilton. And so that's just something to be mindful of. Other opportunities, basically update that OSRP. Work was initiated in 2020. You guys do have a conditional approval, but that does not mean you have a full approval. So I highly recommend you getting that completed and get that letter from the state that says you're good to go so you can start to tap into those funds that might be available for any projects you want to do. And within that document, you know that if you guys are familiar with it, you can start to expand partnerships with land trusts, other municipalities, identify other key resource protection methods and things like that. Also just really kind of do a deep dive assessment of your open spaces and the protections that are there within and kind of what the next steps would be in terms of enhancing that as the residents have indicated they'd like. Also update the Hamilton Wyndham Recreation Master Plan. I think it's been a while. It's just one of those things where we always say that you want to keep those updated so that you can tell the community that you do have a plan and you are working towards a plan, whatever that plan may be. And a master plan study effort will help you do that. Also improve, update mapping of sensitive ecological areas. Those are always changing, so it's always good to have those updated periodically. So I highly recommend you kind of going through that effort because it'll help you with those documents that we talked about in terms of the OSRP and some of those assessments that you're going to look to do. And lastly here, improve, enhance robust trail systems and passive recreation area. Essentially promote, and I think a key aspect of that is also the promotion of those that's existing. I think sometimes it's one of those things where a lot of folks don't understand the great resources they already have available to them. So that's an effort that could happen that I think could really boost the residents' experiences with that. And then with that, I'll just wrap it up and questions and answers, and I'm happy to flip back to any of those questions or anything, whatever you'd like to do. Thanks for being patient and listening.
I think that one of the issues that's front and center right now is this development on Tobacco Road of this Essex Street 56 units, and I think it involves dynamiting the site for 6 months. And the question is, the intent is to aggregate the sewerage from the 56 units and potentially re-inject it after processing in the aquifer recharge area over in the Tobacco Lake watershed, North Coastal watershed, which is Manchester's water supply and our backup water supply. So that's one of the major elements that I think is up on the front docket at the moment.
Just a matter of clarification, it's a 50-unit proposed project. It's only consuming 16 of the acres. It covers or uses site coverage on about 5 of the 66 overall acres. It does have Board of Health approval for its septic system. It's using one of those highly sophisticated systems, which, by the way, is about 1,000 feet away from water sources. So all of our consultants have advised us that we're in good stead relative to that.
I think the question was whether or not there'd been adequate inspection of the re-injection area. I guess if you've got what, tertiary treatment of the wastewater before it's put back on the ground, but then the aquifer recharge is apparently right in that area somewhere.
It's this septic facility won't be within it. It's separate from it, which is an important distinction that the planning board was pretty firm on, and they had the property or the proponent of the project bifurcate the portion of land that includes the GPOD, and that's not part of the actual development. So, every protection has been taken that
Okay, that's good.
we know how to pursue.
That's good. And how about the element of the dynamiting to the extent it would fracture and change water flows subsurface?
Our hydrogeologists have advised us that all the appropriate protections are being taken. There's monitoring that will take place. They believe this is conventionally, or they're using contemporary approaches that are appropriate and protective. One thing that I did want to make people aware of, Hamilton has had an open space committee. They disbanded before COVID, but they did prepare a draft plan with MAPC that was submitted to the state. It's been reviewed. The state had a number of comments that they wanted to see revisited so that plan could become fully accepted. One of the things that I think that the town needs to do is reconstitute a new open space committee so that work can be completed.
Yeah, that sounds like it should be.
Is that draft something that you could forward along to the committee members?
Sure.
Just to see if it aligns with what we're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good. I thought there was something in train there.
Yeah, that, was prepared, again, before COVID. It got reviewed by the state. There were a number of elements that they wanted to see, clarified or done a little bit differently. So MAPC is aware of that, but it's important to have committee involvement in such matters. So we would need to reconstitute a committee to pursue that.
And obviously, since 2008, the Sagamore passive recreation space has opened up. That's all subsequent to that, so that should all be a part of that, I assume. So that's a big deal, Cass. The Sagamore thing. There's 3 towns involved in it, and we're one of the biggest pieces of it, I believe. Patrick, you'll correct me if
Yes,
I'm
sir.
wrong. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's a beautiful stretch of land. If you're in Essex, you need to go up there and walk around a little bit. I enjoy that place. It's
That's great. That's good to know. I have not been there yet, so I'll put that on the list for sure.
So one of the things, the presentation was very good for information, but one of the things I'd like to see is we move it forward into kind of more of a chapter, and it's something that we can help give some color to is kind of these different areas that are shaded in different colors. It's what makes them special places. I mean, we have things that are in perpetuity and then protected, maybe not totally in perpetuity, but we're really not, and I don't remember talking about it in other elements yet, in terms of the biodiversity, natural habitat. I mean, you know, we talked about recreation and parks and baseball fields and pickleball courts and horse riding, which is all fantastic stuff. But, you know, there's other species on the planet and just trying to figure out, and I think MassGIS has so much of that data already, so it's just kind of layering it in. And if we're looking at these places, it's what about these specific places make them what they are and why they were protected in the first place, and just understand that thread a little bit more.
Okay.
So we can communicate, you know, the Hamilton is question and, you know, add some color to a map like this. But I think the map is good. I will say, as I always say when I see maps like this, just a few more street names on some, just to orient people.
Noted.
And I know that's probably base map that starts with that, but it's just, but I think overall, I think this is the best map I've seen that calls out the different places. So I really appreciate the call out boxes. I think they're easy to read, and can orient people quickly if we're going from those places and then figuring out where you live. But
a quick note on the kind of basically the flora and fauna that are special to Hamilton. I think that the open space, there is a very robust chapter within the open space and recreation plan that addresses just that. And I think that that's something that we can talk about. But yeah, they have all that based on GIS data in terms of priority habitats and things like that. So we can incorporate those items as we go through. It's well noted. Thank you. Thanks.
I know that pickleball hysteria is sweeping the New England. I'm ignorant on the subject. Is that a separate court, or is that a piece of a tennis court?
you could stripe
It's both. It's both.
Yeah,
So what's happening right now across the country, particularly Massachusetts, I'm in towns all over the place, is that at existing tennis courts, you can actually restripe to change tennis courts to have pickleball kind of on one side of the court. And then so basically on each end of the court, you can have your own pickleball court, and those folks bring their own nets and just kind of take over and do the stuff there. And then they're building more and more dedicated pickleball courts than I've ever seen. So all of the above. They're just trying to jam them everywhere they can, just because it's really, what's amazing is it started out being more for like the higher age folks, and now it's just starting to trickle down to really the younger folks. And it's one of those that works, it's crosses generations, which is great to see. So I think that's why people like it.
Apparently.
It's like paddle tennis.
Yeah.
Which I've never really played. Again, they don't let me in those clubs that have those. But paddle tennis, it's just without the walls, I think, without the wall nets.
I don't know how much space we got for that. That'd be a Patton Park addition, I guess. Huh?
It really is just a matter of striping it on there. It's low effort for a lot of reward. It hits a lot of folks.
Well, I think if we started taking up tennis court space for pickleball, there'll be a huge outcry. We don't have that many public tennis courts, so I think we're talking about from scratch, probably at Patton Park. Put it in a few corners or something like that.
You can stripe a tennis. You can stripe a tennis court, but you just need to have a retractable net because the net's a little different. But you can use a tennis court and stripe it.
You can actually put the whole court on one end of the tennis court and still have space. So it's like basically on one side of the tennis court, you can have a whole pickleball court, and then on the other side of the net, so the nets don't even need to come down for tennis.
Oh, okay, good. That's good to know.
So like you could basically, for the 3 tennis courts you might have, you could put 6 pickleball courts, for example.
Whoa.
It's a lot of pickleball.
I tell you what, it's amazing. I haven't played it. I got to play it just to see what all the hype's about.
Cass, the photo that you showed is the first photo that I've seen of pickleball. And before that, I had heard about this game and I had no idea what it was. And I hadn't had a chance to look it up on the web yet or anything like that. So thank you.
There you go.
Thank you for explaining pickleball to me.
Coming to a tennis court near you, I promise.
Do folks have other questions or comments for
Yep.
for Cass's presentation?
I'd like to understand a little bit more about when the table you had that said none, and just kind of where you, not for today, but just understanding that if
What
it's
that
not
is?
none, what is it? And
I knew you were going to ask that, and honestly, I don't have an answer for you. I got to dig into the details to
Because,
figure out
I
what
mean,
the heck that
really
is.
So that's
I knew
that
I
has
knew you
to-
were going to ask that 'cause I was like, I don't know what that is either.
that has to do with protection, right?
Yes,
And-
let me bring
Yeah,
it.
so that's actually when we did I think it was the land use section.
That's right.
We had a section that that described what the none was, because and I can't remember it exactly at the moment, but it is kind of an oxymoron.
yeah, and we don't.
I'm blanking on it too. I remember reading that. It's like, I
We don't
knew I
have
should have had
that
that on.
answer.
I knew you were going to ask that. I should have known.
An answer right now, but I mean, what we're struggling with a lot with this committee is, okay, so there's developed that's not, I mean, we can always redevelop, and then there's protected in perpetuity, and then there's the in-between. And the in-between is really the most important thing we're looking at. So really understanding that in-between is very important, because protected in perpetuity, that's what it is. We can tell people all about it. We can have a great narrative. But the next chapter of that is still the same thing it is right now. It's that middle ground of that may evolve and change that we want to really be focusing on and understand what that evolution is and try to guide that.
Especially as those relate to basically habitat and ecodiversity and ecological corridors. To your point
Right, I
earlier, I
mean,
think
are
that
those
could be
things we
it could be a key avenue that we don't want to go away.
Right, do we want to make sure we're protecting those even further, and et cetera? So, thank you.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, now that I'm thinking about it a little more, the none is typically privately held open space land that could get sold off at any time. So technically it has like no legal protection to keep it open space. There's no codicil on the land. There's no, this thing is going to remain in conservation for the next 50 years or anything like that. Somebody could sell it.
Right, and that's why I want to know more about it, that's all.
Yeah.
Couldn't those also just be housing envelopes within protected land, which might or might not, I mean, they might not be developable at all except by the owner of the surrounding land? I mean, that could be a category that is actually totally protected effectively. Because most.
In other words, it's not.
Yeah, that sounds almost like a Chapter 61 type thing, where if it's inhabited, but it's in a slightly protected area. I think that's those agricultural spaces, those recreational spaces that basically they have it listed as a Chapter 61 so they can get a tax benefit. But like I said, that can't go away. Because typically, if it's conservation land, it's typically not inhabited. But that's also not 100% always true. So well noted.
But if you had a large tract that was protected in perpetuity, but certain housing envelopes had been held out at 2 acres per, with all those in the aggregate could add up in a place like Hamilton. I mean, I know one property that has probably at least five or 6, maybe 10 housing envelopes. And that, I mean, at 10 of you've got 20 acres in there. If that 20 acres was a part of that 108, that's a significant portion of it. But it would never be developed. It's not really. It's only developable by whoever has the surrounding property.
We can dig into that.
Could you? That'd be great.
Cool. Do we want to move on to the next agenda topic?
Yep.
A little worried about time.
Yep.
All right. Yes, I'll see if I can share over the top of you, but
Oh yeah, let me stop. Sorry, I was taking notes.
Yeah. No worries at all, really.
All right.
Thank you so much. I really Really appreciate all the work you're doing on this. And the actual narrative section of the this element, the existing conditions, is being developed too, and that'll be that should be available pretty shortly.
Jim, you might note Rosie has joined us.
Yeah.
Welcome, Rosie.
All right, so we talked about this a little bit earlier on in the meeting, the document sharing and what is available up there currently. There are three basic folders of things. One is meeting materials, another one's draft chapters, and the third one is the implementation plan and actions. And you'll notice there is, in the draft chapters, there's also an implementation plan, but that was that skeleton that we had put together to give you guys a general idea about how that section of the plan would look. And the implementation plan and actions is the thing that we're going to work on a little bit more this evening, where we're starting to populate some of the rows of the tables with action items to include in the plan. So this is where we'll get the opportunity to discuss implementation plan actions, and where you know, as part of your homework, you get to fill some of that stuff in. This is still, of course, the Google Drive location, and roughly what the Google Drive looks like when you hop on there if you haven't looked yet. I know a bunch of people have been on there, and this has been great. We're seeing a lot of good comments. So I wanted to give some of the highlights from the comments so far. This is really, you know, having to do with the chapters. As noted a moment ago, there is, and earlier in the meeting too, there's an Excel spreadsheet that is up in the Google Drive that has much more thorough listing of comments. Emil and Dana have been doing a really great job of populating that with comments. They have comments on each of the elements of the plan so far, the drafts that we have up there, and again, really appreciate the effort that's gone into that. That is great. Some general comments that we've had so far. So, you know, there are various typos and graphical edits as we would expect to see at this point in the planning process. Not tons of them, few of them in each chapter. And so those things, as they get identified, we really appreciate them. We'll build them into the, you know, more final versions of those chapters as we move along. And it'll help us out with the front part of the plan, which will, you know, be much more reader friendly than the current existing condition sections. There were a few things about word choice. And again, those are very much appreciated. Make sure, you know, we're really reflecting what it is that's intended here. A few mapping clarifications. You know, some items that needed to get adjusted, and then there are some requests for more detail. So we'll address those. Data clarification, sort of the same basic thing. Dana mentioned that she has some updated school information, reports and plans that she expected she'd be able to share with me. So once we get that information, we'll build it into the facilities and service section.
That's key, Jim. That's a big deal. The school thing is a major factor here, and so the sooner we can get that and in an accurate form. SBA, I think, is going to be the big question. So that's where the big unknowns, I think, come in.
Yep. Yeah. No. Duly noted. So, you know, so once we get that information, we'll get that built in there, and you know, that'll help us going forward. some of the information is minimal, minimally explained and needs clearer, sort of a clearer thread going through it. That was just sort of a general comment, I think, about existing condition sections. And, frankly, the way an existing condition section is written at this stage in the planning process, often comes off this way, with needing more data, needing clearer explanation, needing explanation of primarily what the data means. So you get all this data and you put it all in a plan, and somebody really digs into it, is able to pull out, sort of the common threads. We will do that. We haven't done that at this point yet because we're still sort of exploring the data, but this is a good point too. It's not clear what the reader's supposed to take away from the reading of the land use tables or information in general. Same basic idea as that last comment, but more specific to land use. Some questions about what topics are covered in each section. So that'll become clearer as we move through this too. Hopefully the outlines that have been pulled together so far help out with that a little bit. I know that some of those outlines really focused on that upfront section, and that stuff's a little bit in flux. We're sort of, inventing it as we develop it, I suppose, might be a good way to put it. So I think that'll get clearer as we move through things. And then there was the issue we talked about earlier about the 2005 and the 2016 land use data and their comparability. And trying to get to the bottom of that. So those are some key comments so far. I don't know if anybody has anything else that they would like to add at this point.
Jim, practically speaking, all the drafts that I've read so far have a lot of typos and errors of that nature. I'm assuming, since most of them are not complete and they're subject to augmentation, do you really want to get into typos at this stage in the game?
I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on it because a lot of that stuff, frankly, I think will clear up as we go through it. So I think that's if that's where you were going with that comment, Jack, then. Yeah, that stuff will get cleared up. I would say that these chapters are sort of at like the 50% or maybe 70% kind of completion level at this stage as far as existing conditions go.
Yeah,
so
I'm assuming
there's still a fair amount of polish to do.
Yeah, I'm assuming your editors your duty pedants will get onto this thing and start to, because otherwise, I mean, we can mark them up, but I think it's too early at this point.
Yeah, don't feel the need to go crazy on that.
Jim, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Where does the financial information that Eric's developing fit in? I'm looking for context.
So as far as like where it fits into the plan, that will be, that's going to end up having its own section in the plan, sort of a fiscal impact assessment, and it'll inform some of the other sections, such as land use, and making sure that the policies that you guys are looking to adopt in terms of land use are reflective of the kind of housing and development that is appropriate for the area, as well as being, I guess we might call it fiscally sustainable. Does that help answer the question? I'm not sure if that's what you were looking for or not, Rick.
I think it does. I'm just trying to understand sort of when that happens. We will have developed all these sections based on available data. And I understand that's the process that you're going through now. And when the data collection and refinement and clarification is completed, then I assume, and I may be wrong here, is Eric on the same pathway so that once you have completed the data collection and refinement, and you feel comfortable with, and the committee feels comfortable with the data that's been collected is reflective and complete, is Eric on the parallel track collecting that information? And when will that come in this process?
Yeah, so he did, of course, the presentation on economics previously and on housing. And the next step in this process will be to go through the, I don't know, I'm gonna call it the computer model that John Privilege, I think I got that name right, has
That's right.
He's developed that model, and so he'll work with John on sort of updating it and truing it up for this process, and then that'll lead to some projections for the future, based on current economic conditions and based on what we might like to do in terms of land use and zoning and changes, and be able to make some level of prediction about how those things might impact the fiscal issues within the town.
Will that be a separate chapter, Jim?
Yeah, that's sort of a separate section, because it requires going through some of these existing conditions initially, especially the economics and the land use, and then making some assumptions or decisions for the purpose of the plan about the kind of things that you might like to explore that'll lead to projections. So changes again in like your existing zoning and rules and things like that, that'll lead to changes in potential changes in future economic conditions, and trying to predict that. And so that'll be put into a separate chapter because it requires that kind of projection.
So can I just...
When do you think that might be forthcoming?
I think we were talking about that in the early summer, if I remember correctly.
Thank you.
Right, because they will have to operate in parallel once Eric's completed his piece and you've completed your piece, then you'll have these two data sets. And then I think, as you've described, they will really inform each other.
Yep.
And so, and I think David was asking sort of the same question I had, is when do you envision that being done? And it sounds like late summer. So that's when you then sit down and say, okay, here's our existing sort of financial conditions and projected future conditions. And here are what's the data is telling us where we are. And the two then combine to tell us, start looking at where we could go and playing out scenarios and how they impact each other.
That's right.
So that sounds like that will happen in the fall.
I think that'll happen, Rick, that'll happen in the early to middle summer. That's the time frame for that.
So by September, when everybody gets back in gear, we'll have some preliminary maybe recommendations based on the interaction of the two data sets?
Yeah, I think by that point, we should have a fairly solid idea. You know, we might have even gotten to sort of the next step.
Which is?
So that would be having, that would be sort of making decisions about what it is that you want to do, and then, how to build that into the plan. So having that sort of thing written up.
Yeah. And I'm thinking just I'm sorry to dominate the conversation here, but I'm just sort of thinking ahead is is once those preliminary recommendations or options are discussed and selected by the master plan committee, that would be a logical time to then take it to the public and say, hey, here's the existing financial, here's the existing land use, recreation, open space, whatever. And here, based on what we're seeing on those two sides, here's some beginning some options and recommendations. What do you, John Q. Public, think about these?
Yep. We had that, as you know, that visioning session back in November that was just kind of wide open. What would you, as the word implies, what would you envision? And, without a lot of thought about details and stuff like that. So now go through the existing conditions for various, subject matter elements, and especially looking at the economic and fiscal detail, and sort of being able to compare that to the vision statements and think about the sorts of things that you might not just like to do, but that are really pragmatic to do, and how that might impact the near-term future, next 5-10 years, whatever. And and then that gets built into the plan as well.
Good, thank you.
Jim, the interesting thing for me is that in reading through these surveys, and I've read a fair number, and there's a recurrent theme which I find laudable, to tell you the truth. There seems to be an appreciation. Well, on the one hand, people are looking desperately for diversified revenue sources. And I think there's an appreciation out there that housing's not going to get us anywhere. We've got to catch up on our 40B. And that's going to be a user of funds, not a source of revenue. And the MBTA thing, I don't know what the hell's going to happen there, but I don't expect anything helpful or salutary out of that. So residential, generally, if we broke even, we'd be lucky. So I think people understand that we've got to do something else with respect to revenue sources, specifically in the commercial realm somehow, and on the other hand is do something about our expenses, and they seem to appreciate that regionalization is probably our only opportunity for getting some kind of economies of scale in a lot of the things. And people are what I have seen in the surveys is the general public as within the survey sampling understand that, which is a good thing. So I think those are things that we really need to bear down on if we're going to get the fiscal situation in town into some kind of better shape than it is right now, which is not so good. We're looking at a lot of overrides at the moment.
Will those numbers be included in the data that's going to be?
Well, we're just talking. Eric is the data guy. He's the financial. So I'm just introducing those two elements as what I'm getting from the survey. Others may get something different from the survey. And I could be corrected on I haven't seen every one of these surveys, and you may find the preponderance goes in another direction. But I think that's what I'm getting out of the survey, is that the town does appreciate what has to happen here in order to achieve what we need to achieve.
Jim, could you please clarify, once again, with apologies, are we looking in terms of end product for you to provide options and recommendations, or is that the sole province of the steering committee?
That is a joint effort. So we will certainly do that, but we would be foolish if we thought that we would be able to go into a community and say, like, okay, here's how you get yourself out of this particular hole, or this is how you preserve things. We see our job as presenting options, helping to present options, and helping to identify, you know, if there are areas where folks are getting stuck on what they want to do, help to sort of unstick things and identify things to help progress forward. And then, of course, to build that into something that is, you know, reasonably digestible by somebody who's reading the plan. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, no, I know it's sort of, when you're in the midst of a planning process like this, particularly at this point where you're starting to see data, but you still don't really have like a clear direction. There aren't clear threads about where you're going next. It can be challenging and it feels kind of frustrating. And I think it's like that both on the side of the professionals and on the side of the folks on the committee, like you folks. It's probably a little less frustrating for the professionals because we look at it and we go like, okay, we did this in such and so a community or for such and so an issue, you know, last month. So we know we're going to get to the next step. We know how to get there. For you guys, you only do this once in a while. And so you're more emotionally bought into it because it's your community. And so I think this is a challenging point in the planning process. And the reason that I bring it up is that I guess I'd ask everybody to continue to be patient and build in their ideas. And we'll do our best to sort of bring those ideas together in a way that makes sense. Hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Jim, in terms of information and the drafts, I know I haven't put a lot of comments. This is Kristen, in the Google, in the comment matrix yet. But you guys, the maps that you were showing, like, I feel like you should have a map and it should stand alone. You should put it up there and be like, okay, this is telling me the story. But I'm really having trouble with the base map not being very readable. And then we have all this other great information that is on top of it. So I don't know if we can have kind of a separate just map session. I know Jack mentioned a couple of the roads were bridle trails, and just really just iron out what's this base map, because I don't want to have you guys have to recreate things as you keep building on this base map layer. So that's just my biggest comment of this whole thing, of just making sure that we have information that we can easily communicate and that can stand, especially mapping that should be able to stand on its own. So that's, and I know I've said that before, but as we continue to build, it's just, I want to see all of these maps be great maps that people, the average person, can just read and understand. So
It's a great envisionment tool.
So I think that's a really great point, Kristen. There are a couple of things about the current maps that I'd point out. Well, one big one, I guess, which is that the current resolution in the existing conditions sections that we have, they're on 8.5, 11 by 11 sheets of paper, basically, in the document. And in what we ultimately produce for you folks, they will be significantly larger. So they'll be at a better resolution and you'll be able to pull out information. I'm thinking too that we're probably getting to the point where we have enough maps that it might make sense to do one agenda item one of these nights coming up soon, just going over maps, going over a few of the maps, maybe pick half a dozen of them or something like that, and spend 20 minutes, half an hour kind of going through them and making sure that they're going in the direction that everybody wants.
yeah, or if you want a working session offline, like not in this format with everyone, and I don't know if any other people, I don't mind being part of it, Jack, you know every nook and cranny of Hamilton, so
Pretty close.
just to make sure that, what you're showing as a base layer, at least of roadways, parcels, major things, and then build on that. So before we have the next meeting, because it's something that could take a long time, and I know we have so much information to get through, and it might be helpful to just have your GIS kind of guys work with us, not necessarily come to a meeting like this, but anyway, I just want to throw it out there. We don't need to decide right now, but it's, I don't know, that's just the one thing that's driving me crazy. But otherwise, I'll put more comments in the matrix.
Jim, is it possible? Is
Sounds
it
like
possible
you're
that a map?
volunteering, Kristen, to work directly with Jim on this.
Only, as I said, Jack needs to help because Jack knows all the.
Well, one question, Jim. And maps being so critical and reveal so many things when they can, and the town is kind of long and skinny. Would it work if, rather than trying to work with an 8.5 by 11, working with 17 by 20? Where it would fold out from the ultimate plan.
That's
So we
actually
get the scale better?
what I personally had in mind for it. I think for a plan like this, it's nice to put the map graphics, especially when you have sort of a long, skinny town like you were describing, Jack.
Yeah.
I think this is probably what you had in mind. 11 by 17s.
That's it.
And so, it's the 11-inch side that is the same as, 8.5 by 11. Like you said, it just folds out. So you get basically two pieces of paper, if you will,
Yeah.
to put the map on.
That's it. That's it. Because it's and the expository role that it would play would be just so much better. You've got a lot of good stuff that's got to get put out there.
Yeah, this is definitely the plan. One of the things that becomes a little challenging with the Google Drive is that when you're posting these things,
Yeah.
it only wants to format the pages as 8.5 by 11. So if you did do a bunch of 11 by 17s and you tried to put that and you had it in a PDF and you tried to put it up on the Google Drive, it cuts off half of the page. I don't know if there's an easy way to fix that. I haven't been able to figure it out quite yet.
Okay. Well, we're all on the same page here anyway,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah.
Next time.
I hope that was an intentional pun. That was a good one.
On my word. Yeah. Okay. We got that one. All right. We can move on, I think.
We could have a pun workshop too if we wanted. All right, so I know you guys have seen this this tabular structure before, and I know a bunch of people have already helped to populate this in the homework. Before we actually get into trying to fill it out as a group and going through what people have given us so far, I wanted to remind people of what we had, because we're going to focus on the land use section and the services and facilities. What we had from, sort of the main findings from each of those PowerPoints, because I know it's been a little while since you've seen them. So I wanted to start with land use and community character. I know community character is particularly important to Hamilton.
Critical.
So specific issues that were identified as part of our examination of land use data is that that there is significant development potential of large estates and institutional properties, but that if this isn't done right, it could pose a threat to community character. So, it's sort of the mentor and the tormentor, if you will, out there in the community. There's this great opportunity, but it has to be done thoughtfully. Hamilton has a large downtown area, or decent sized downtown area, with a mix of uses and commuter rail access. The area is currently constrained. It's constrained by further development, due to existing wastewater capacity. Everybody's on on-site systems, essentially. Parking is available, but it's sometimes difficult to access, and there's wayfinding that's needed to provide a better connection between the downtown and the available parking. So that people know how to get from the parking lot to wherever it is they really want to go. Regulations constrain future growth and type and potential. Looking at those regulations a little more closely is something that is going to be important, I think, going forward.
Yeah.
Development in the town is constrained by ecologically sensitive habitats such as wetlands and water resources, and they limit development type and potential. So, good news is you have these, beautiful tracts of land, excellent resources, beautiful wetlands, water resources, et cetera. The bad news is that if you want to do a bunch of development, you have to work around these things. So I guess that's, it's examining these things and figuring out how to best leverage your opportunities. That is something that's important going forward. The town has a significant amount of protected land, about 4,000 acres, of which about 42.5%, it's probably too granular, let's say 43%, is considered permanently protected. Additionally, there's approximately 268 acres of privately owned Chapter 61 land. And then last point here on this slide is that almost 45% of the land in the town is currently limited by regulation to 2-acre zoning, and that this will tend to lead to fragmented land and sprawl type development patterns, which I know is something that you folks want to stay away from. So that's going to require a little bit of reconfiguration, if you will, in the way zoning is done. Wait for that to get muted or something.
Hey, Jim, on the,
Yes.
if you take that last page,
Yeah.
second
Hold on a
paragraph.
moment. There we go. Like that?
Yeah. Second paragraph, first sentence, Hamilton has a large downtown area. In a relative way, we absolutely do not. We have a very small downtown area.
I'll
I know
second
that-
that. It's 25 acres.
As I was reading that, I was kind of shaking my head, thinking to myself, like, no, it is not really a large downtown area. So, yeah, thank you. So, some questions for you guys to think about going forward. How can, and each of these is intended to relate to, kind of the order of the last slide. So how can large estate and institutional properties be used to contribute to the tax base without significantly altering the character of, of the community in which they're located, as well as the town overall? And I know this is something that you guys are thinking about quite a bit, particularly, with respect to Gordon Conwell. How can we adapt the downtown area, and how can we increase wastewater capacity to accommodate more growth? Another question, how can existing regulations be amended to provide more concise requirements while maintaining flexibility? How can we identify ecologically sensitive areas and protect them from development impacts?
Jimmy, I just interrupt for a moment. In the prior item, what does the word concise mean there?
Can existing regulations be amended to provide more concise requirements while maintaining flexibility? So, concise, simpler, clearer, more well-defined.
Predictable.
Thank you.
Let's see, I think we were down to how the town can ensure non-protected property is developed in a manner that is consistent with the community character. And how can the town use master plan process to set policy directives to amend the regulatory framework to achieve community vision and goals? And then from those questions, So here's some initial ideas for addressing community questions. And then I think from here, we could go on to trying to take a look at land use in the action tables and seeing, what we want to build in there. So initial ideas for addressing community questions would be consider allowing additional uses within estate and institutional properties and their existing buildings to preserve the character of the estate while broadening the tax base. Another one, strengthen and update the design principles and investigate options to expand wastewater capacity. Third one, so consider options for form-based code. I know sometimes that's a dirty word, so things like form-based code would be okay too. We don't necessarily have to call it that. And adding concise standards that allow also for flexibility. There's that word concise again. Map ecologically sensitive areas to determine their locations and define where development is appropriate. We're actually talking about that a little bit as part of Cass's presentation a minute ago. Review and amend the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations to ensure that design and use are in keeping with community character, and then engage the community and stakeholders to work towards creating a vision for the future of the town with implementable goals, policies, and actions. And now, before I open this up for discussion, what I'd like to do is pull up the land use table, and I have it here. Show, I'm going to make this a little bit, zoom in a little here. Show some of what Emil and Dana had put together with respect to the land use actions. And there's some on this page, and then I believe there's some below here. Yep, some below here as well. Again, Dana and Emil, I really appreciate the effort that you guys put in on, being brave and being the ones who began this process in the group. This is really great, really helpful. If I could, and I think I'm gonna turn to Emil first because he has, quite a number of recommendations in here. Emil, if you wouldn't mind going through and explaining some of these recommendations a little bit and your thoughts.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, this is a first shot at the developing this implementation plan, and for me, I take a little bit different look at what land use is about, and for me, it's more, and it's about where you place land use. For me, it's more about community character, which I think is the issue that people would like to think about in order to protect. And to understand more about community character, then you need to identify what it is the town treasures and what they like about the town. So it's looking at it mostly from a designer's standpoint, and then with the idea of doing the land use where further down in looking ahead, there should be a land use section, to my mind, there, because that sort of brings in all of the other threads, the economic development, the housing, and all the rest of it. They all feed into the land use issue in implementation. So this section is to come up with a series of policies. So starting at the top, there's a single goal, maintain and enhance the character of Hamilton by preserving and protecting the resources that contribute to its overall ambience and character. I believe I can't see the right-hand side of that.
Oh, quality of life you had.
Oh, quality of life, sorry.
Yep.
That's sort of an all-encompassing kind of statement there that would then sort of form the basis for some of these policies. The first one there, identify and protect the natural resources that contribute to Hamilton's overall ambience and character. And then the breakdown of that policy, what's underneath that. I'm looking at it from across the room here, so,
Oh, do you want me to make that bigger?
yeah, if you could.
Absolutely. And if it's easier for you and you want me to read it, I'm fine with that too, and then you could explain it.
Yeah, that's great, right there. So this takes kind of a resource look at what the town is, and it's for people to kind of understand how to look at a town to decide what it is that makes it look the way it is, and therefore that leads into how do you want to grow, which is protect those things that people treasure. So I like to look at it from this standpoint, actually in about 5 different areas. One is resources, one would be development, pedestrian-friendly design, neighborhoods, and rural districts. This is an idea that looks at and identifies what is called in some places character areas, because the idea is that if you're going to plan to change any part of the town, you have to do it in character with that particular part of town. And it may sound more complicated, but it really, when you get into it, it sort of comes together. So the resources is the first, and there are really 4 resources there. It's the natural resources, the historic and cultural resources, it's the visual resources that are part of that aspect, the resources. And these are things I think that people understand. Because the resources can be, they can be wetlands, aquifers, wildlife habitat, those sorts of things that are part of what makes the town look the way it does. And again, this is an idea that strives really to take all the individual parts, pull them together into a fabric that really makes the town, again, look the way it does and why people like to live here, I think. And so under 7.1.1, we have A, which is protect the water resources, such as watercourses, lakes, aquifers, wetland areas. B, should be B, protect Hamilton land resources, such as woodlands, uplands. This is kind of a general statement there that is basically one of the principles of that what the town might want to protect, get in their plan. 7.1.2, preserve historic and cultural resources that contribute to community character. That's considering and adopting a town ordinance to protect things like stone walls, cellar holes, other significant artifact from the past, which is critical. The historic part of the town, in this town, is very significant. Although we have only limited historic districts, there are a lot of other important buildings and natural features or man-made features. Number B is protect historic sites and monuments that commemorate Hamilton's history. Again, this is preserve these. This is all under the general, what should we protect in terms of community character. 7.1.3, preserve and protect important visual resources that contribute to community character. Those would be what you consider like view sheds in traveling along a scenic road, for example. Identify ones that are of particular interest to residents here in town. And again, it's not not a matter of protecting those so much as identifying what they are, where they are, and so that we make a note in terms of when projects come in to be developed, we take them under consideration. 7.1.4, use creative techniques such as conservation subdivision techniques and view sector regulations to preserve character resources. The town had a cluster subdivision type of regulation that a lot of developers hesitate to use that for some reason, but that is a good one. But the conservation one goes back more to kind of a smart growth influence on the town. And actually, a lot of these are based on the smart growth, which is more about the environmental preservation, about protecting that aspect of the town. These next two, I think Dana must have put these in. How can we?
Yeah,
develop,
Yeah,
attract.
those are Dana's, and they're not necessarily, I just sort of collapsed everything together
Yeah,
onto
yeah.
one sheet. So they don't necessarily fit in the policy categories that you had, Emil, except as it happens, I think the second one kind of does fit in here a little bit. And
Can we create more
I don't know if
density?
maybe Dana could talk about that one for a moment.
Yeah, well, Dana's not here, so I can do that.
Oh, she's, okay, sorry.
Can we create more density in order to preserve more green space? How can we proactively decide to build more densely? Yeah, that's a good one. I think the smart growth does address that, where you should build, where you should not build. And it's not so much about density, but it is about building in a compact manner in which you build in proximity. It's not really a density tool at all, but an example might be in the downtown area, would be an area where we would be a very good place to increase the density there as part of a development, economic development in the downtown area. So that would be a great place to do it. Again, the smart growth, they discourage growth in undeveloped areas, in green spaces, and encourage growth in developed areas for redevelopment or new development. How can we think proactively to decide to build more density? Again, I think understanding a town, building the places that we want to build, and that's a curious thing about a lot of towns, that they know what they want, but they never build what they want. And you look at a lot of communities, and what they have done is lost the things about it that they really enjoy or preserve or drew them to the town in the first place. So this kind of leads into the methodology to do it. And I know you mentioned the form-based codes short time ago. To me, anyway, this would be an excellent place to get involved in that whole technique, because that really is the way to do it. It's a small area. It does need intensive design where you bring together multidisciplined professionals to look at it from various aspects, not only architecture, landscape architecture, from economic development and so forth. These experts would sort of lead an intense design session with the town boards, with the residents, and come up with a plan that would create, in the end, a prescriptive type of code, which, again, to me, is the only way you're going to get what you really want in this community. If you leave it as a proscriptive code like we have now, the town is constantly going to be fighting with with developers on what they're proposing to do. It's kind of a trial and error. It's really a very inefficient process for people on both sides of the table. But I like the form-based code approach because it's a prescriptive code. The town has gone through this whole effort to put together what it would like to see in the town, and then the developer simply has to meet those standards. And I find it to be a very effective way to get the type of development that you really want. And the town can make that decision, how big to grow, how small to grow, and not leave it up to a developer who may not know best about this.
Hey, Bill, could you just define the would you say form prescriptive?
Oh, the form-based.
Form
Yeah,
basic.
form-based code, that's sort of a whole talk in itself. I'll give you a PowerPoint on that sometime, but that's really a neat way to do it. And it really, as I say, it turns the whole process on its head. It takes, instead of a developer coming to town looking for an approval and asking, again, kind of a trial and error, that there's always pushback from one side on the other. What it does is the town develops a design for a site, like a downtown, designs it actually through using professionals. They come up with a prescriptive code which says, you shall build the building here. They give a lot of flexibility in terms of the shape, the size, the look of it within the character of the town. And again, this is all working with the town and the professionals here and whatever, so it's a solid way to do it. And then the developer comes and the approval process is really shortened, which developers like. And because if they do it exactly the way your code prescribes, it's pretty much an automatic approval. So it's an excellent way. It's a very efficient way to go ahead. It does cost the town a little money to design something, But for an area so important to me as the downtown area here, if we're talking about the area up to the Winthrop School, this to me would be the only way to go that would sort of give you the best prospect for success. So I think this is, for me anyway, this would be a great thing to introduce.
Sounds great.
Another lengthy topic to discuss for another time is regarding transfer of development rights. This very last statement there, can we create more density in order to preserve more green space, is exactly what that concept is about.
Yeah.
Is concentrating development in the areas where you determine it's appropriate, but in order to do that development at that location, developers provide extra funds to allow for that density and for that profit generation, but for certain amounts of funds to come to the community who can then obtain open space at other locations that are important to them. And that's one of the things that, you know, we've talked a little bit about at the planning board. I sent a lot of information during the early days of COVID when I had a lot of work time at home. And there are a lot of examples from Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard regarding some of the models that they have used. But I think Hamilton's probably a really good, you know, location where we could focus on utilizing that regulatory approach to things.
And the part of the master plan that we should get involved in is where would those occur in the town, and that should be part of this process, I think, to identify again, so that and I think this is something that has to go through a lot of study, of course, because it'll be contentious, but that would be a way to increase the density.
But this is.
Yeah, I might suggest that instead of actually identifying specific areas, which could, you know, require like a,
Yeah.
that's almost a study unto itself.
Yeah.
That maybe we identify criteria.
Yes, so that's another way, yeah, yeah.
But how can we use what are usually referred to as disadvantages of the town, our high water table and the wetlands and so forth, the proximity of the Miles River and so forth? How can we turn that to something that would support what you're talking about, where we could put density where it would be more appropriate as smart growth and so forth? I mean, are we into where we could use wetlands as Phragmites processing, in part of the processing for wastewaters and things like that? I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about too? Because we have proximate wetlands in good spots there, and
In a lot of spots. I think the idea is to assess the town where you might say do, and I'll just throw this out there, sort of a satellite mixed-use development somewhere that would allow for some economic development and residential, create a sub-community somewhere else.
say you took the Winthrop School site, for example, which is smart growth in town, within the village, and would lend itself, it's 9 acres to a type of development such as you've just been describing. But it's going to be limited to some extent by how it deals with its wastewater.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
is there a way to balance off with modern technology the disadvantages of that site to better utilize the site for, say, mixed development of some sort, where, you know, housing, where the housing and commercial development could come up together, be mutually supportive, eliminate traffic, and have the proximity of the rail connection as well, as it all to good advantage? I mean, is that the kind of thing you're sort of thinking about?
Yeah, ultimately, it could lead to something like that, but, you know, the first step is not to get too involved in the solutions of it, but just to identify the areas that would be fitting, perhaps, that the town would accept for development of some sort.
So let me suggest a thought here. Emil, maybe we're going this direction anyways, but in the area of the downtown, maybe maybe where there are spots that that you can do some infill or that you could do some redevelopment,
Yeah.
you might allow a developer to do that at a higher density
Yes.
than, and as a trade-off, they do something to preserve some of the areas that maybe you were talking about, Jack, where the environmental constraints are such that you really don't want a lot of development there anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to stay out of the green fields. And just as a point, Enon Village, which is affordable housing for Wenham, is right behind the supermarket there. And it all sort of ties into that area.
Yeah.
And they're capped off because of wastewater.
Yeah.
So there's a synergy that could be created there in the kind of thing that in a planned development, such as I think you're describing. It could really work out as a win-win all the way around.
You know, when I first came here, one thing I realized that it's all of the wetlands area, and has probably preserved the downtown area in Hamilton and preserved the way the town looks. I mean, I say that as a, because it was unable to develop, which in the trends that happen around here in adjacent towns could not happen here for those reasons. And I think the town benefited a lot from that. But now as technology is changing, I think there are ways that that some of that development can come back. I don't see Hamilton as ever looking like any of the adjacent towns.
No, I'm not.
There'd be, but it needs some development, that's for
Yeah.
sure. I think there's a lot of agreement there. And
Well, the other point is, we just filled in the lowest spot in town with a 3-story building. And I don't know what's gonna happen if we get another big rainfall. I mean, it's gonna be very interesting to see what does happen. Patrick knows a lot more about how the hydrology and everything worked in that particular instance. But that was the lowest spot in town and used to flood every spring. And it just, something's happened there that has made it feasible just to build this 3-story building, which is kind of an interesting.
yeah, again, getting back to land use, I think I think this is something that a lot of people in town would get really excited about and get involved in, to identify you would start by identifying all the, as I say, all the town treasures. What do people love about the town? The buildings, the sites, the wooded areas, even views. Very detailed. That could all be put on a map, and it's the sort of thing that people would want to contribute to, I think, and get them involved in it. And all these things would come into play when the town starts to grow, because then you can look at all of that data that you collected, and it would give you some idea of where you could do the work and what you should stay away from. And
Yeah.
so that's the value of it, I think, that it is a way to document what you have as a community, and so that when you develop, you don't lose it. And that, I think, is a critical step going forward.
I feel like some of these, what we're doing now with existing conditions is we have
Yeah,
all these layers.
yeah,
And then at some point, when we see them all together, it's like these beacons of light of things of like, this is absolutely something that we want to protect. And this is maybe an area we should be thinking about. And as those can, come forward between, heritage areas and natural biodiversity areas and areas that are protected, not protected, and then embark on these pre-planning activities like form-based code that, turns things on its head kind of and focuses on the public realm first.
yeah,
And what we all experience and how development interacts with the general community and public versus, this private development that's for the private development, and we have to just like pull and beg for how it affects the public realm.
yeah.
So I absolutely I totally agree in that approach. It does take pre-planning and it does take support, and I think it's something that we should, as those, as things become more clear as to the directions and areas we're looking at for those different things, I hope that we can continue to embark on those. The one thing, Jim, on the way that this is set up, I feel like we always need to be thinking about kind of the yin and the yang of economics versus open space versus, it's just, they're all interrelated. And I don't know, just in terms of thought process, as we're going through individually, tonight we're talking about this, and tonight we're talking, and I know it's super complicated to figure out how we want to talk about it, but I just think we just need to, it's always a balance, and keep that in mind as we continue to talk through all of these different elements. And I don't know, I don't have a good suggestion on it, but I agree with everything in Emil's comments. But in terms of 711B, if you scroll up, and this just triggered me, it was like, okay, so we're gonna protect all our woodlands, uplands, and unique. I agree, but what's special about those particular places to protect? Because it's not just all woodlands, all, you know, what is it about that makes it unique and special to make sure we're protecting? And so I just wanna make sure we're always looking at, okay, yes, why? And, you know, and like we should develop here, okay, yes, why? Because it doesn't have, you know, anyway, just kind of just that balance back and forth.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's sort of like identifying the criteria that you guys want to use that makes something a special area that you want to protect, and then you know, getting into the creative techniques for conservation and for redirecting development, so that you have good tools to incentivize developers to come in and work with you to stay away from the areas that you want to protect, or, you know, manage those nicely, and at the same time build the kind of density and the kind of economic growth that the town desperately needs.
Yeah, and I think we have a handful of really important strategic assets that we need to be, you know, that really focused on if we have these goals of diversification and other things, whether it's town center or some properties that might be in flux that aren't permanently protected. But I don't know, we're like, oh, all of this, but I really think it comes down to a few that is manageable to do a lot of pre-planning.
I think we're into a big topic here, and it's 10 minutes after 8.
Yeah.
Emil, I don't want to cut you off,
No,
because
it's
I think
fine.
you're into some really critical stuff here. But I also don't want it truncated by the fact that everybody's getting hungry. So is this a good spot to stop? I mean, if
It
you
is,
do-
yeah. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing process.
Well, these
so
are things that we need to really consider. I think that this is a great idea that you're presenting here.
Yeah, just, again, I'm putting these on the table just for comment, for editing, and, you know, as Jim said, these are not final by any means. You know, it's got to be a collaborative process to go over all of these, but it's just some thoughts.
We're promoting sprawl now. We've
Yeah.
got to stop promoting sprawl, so we know we've got to stop doing what we've been doing.
We have to, yeah.
We have to. So
Right.
that next step is critical here, absolutely critical. As I say, I don't want to cut you up, but I think this is a really
This is a
important
really
thing that
long
needs to be-
discussion to have, and this is not the time, but, you know, I'd like to devote some time to this with
Yes.
the group, because it really is significant, and put together maybe a slideshow or something, but,
So we could dedicate a session to creative zoning techniques and or creative development techniques. And Emil, I know this is an area that's like near and dear to your heart. We could work together on that.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Marnie, we can't do this before Marnie comes back. When's Marnie coming back?
I'm not exactly sure. Patrick, do you know?
I'm not exactly sure either.
She's away 2 weeks, I think, so she left about a week ago, or,
So another week. So it's
week,
imminent.
oh, yeah, yeah.
She needs to be part of this discussion too, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I would
So,
suggest,
so I don't mean to interrupt, Jack. I know you're trying to wrap us up here a little bit, but did you guys find, I want to ask, did you guys find this to be a useful discussion? I think we only just scratched the surface, but did you find it to be a useful discussion, and that it might help lead to a more comprehensive understanding, if you will, of the way to put the plan together so that it really works for you?
I think the format that you've offered here is a good way to do it, so that we can add our comments, you know, to the different categories. It's going to need a lot of editing, but I think I frankly would like to see a lot of information put on a piece of paper and then edited down rather than trying to create something from scratch. So if we have a good start, if we have something that we can just then edit down, it would be a lot easier than trying to recreate this all individually. Could be a huge task unless you're really familiar with the sort of the general. Again, all of these should be tweaked. I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but for me anyway, it's a good way to begin the process. And I like what you set up here, but it's a big ask, I think, of most of the people on the committee here to come up with ideas. But I think Dana's were very good ideas and could be incorporated in the right place, in the right category. So this is like building a tree. The top is the goal. There's only one. Then you go to policy 1, 2, 3, 4, and under each policy you have subtexts. 7.1.1. Then you go 7.1.1a. So it's a nice hierarchy of comments. I think that could work and be edited down the line to be pretty effective. So I like the process.
Good.
I think we're in a stage 2, and we're just trying to get all the information out on the table for everybody to consider.
Yeah. I think so far Jim has given us pretty much as-is conditions and all these main elements, and that's a very good foundation to begin with. Now we've got the tough work of deciding going forward what changes to do.
That's the easy part.
Do we want to spend some more time, perhaps at the next meeting, digging into these land use ideas a little bit more? I kind of feel this is like a real crux of a subject area, I think, for most towns, and especially perhaps for Hamilton.
This is the biggest one to me in the whole list, and this one you have to get right, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd really like to see, just because we have so much existing conditions data, and just visually, if we can print a larger format, and just if you guys are coming in person at one of our next some meeting coming up, or we can just kind of hash it out and just see, okay, like really understand what that synthesis of all that information looks like for where we're going with these goals. I don't know, in kind of a charrette format with just the committee.
Jim,
So I think Kristen, perhaps not for the next meeting, but maybe the one after that, or not too far after that, that would give us enough time to pull together some nice large format maps, make sure that that they're decent and that they have the information that they should have in there, and then do some planning around several of them. I mean.
Yeah, well, I really like this conversation, and if we can kind of have this conversation and sit around a table and draw circles and squares and other map things, just kind of, what are we talking about here? I don't know, I'm very visual.
Yeah, that's like the visioning session is exactly what you were doing there. And
right, but just with that, I mean, I think we have a lot of things to say, and I think I don't know.
And we can have our whole audience, looking over their shoulders and everything.
And whoever wants to come can participate.
Excellent. Okay, have we got a plan, Jim?
So I have to noodle on that one a little bit as to how exactly it comes together. But I think we got a really good, germ or thumbnail or whatever you want to call it. This idea of sort of a more informed, I guess, visioning session. But I think leading into that, we do want to dig into these, I think particularly these land use issues a little bit more. And what Emil and Dana did here really, I think, helps out quite a bit in terms of helping us to organize and formulate maybe, some path forward.
Yeah, I don't want to screw with green spaces.
Yeah, we can, okay, and then so Jack and I will try to work with you, Jim, to try to figure out with your GIS team just some of those mapping questions?
Yep.
At some point, okay. And whoever else
Yeah.
wants to come, just let us know.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said
missed
just whoever, I mean,
missed some of that.
I just appointed Jack because he knows more about Hamilton than anyone else here, so, I don't wanna, but, anyone else who would like to take part. Okay,
We can do a whole committee working session or something like that and bang it out. But I think that we've got to allocate the time to it because it's something we've really got to get fundamentally set down as the foundation to build on. All right. Are we at a point? We
Just about. So I just want to confirm at the very end here, sort of the next meeting and what we're going to talk about next time. So we got the 12th at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
We should have, we're going to be having a whole, an open space section that's a narrative pretty soon for you guys to comment on. That might take, a few more days. But the economic development and housing section, I think those are very nearly ready for you to take a look at. And then for agenda items next time round, we have sort of our standard ones here and continued work on action and homework chapters. If you guys are up for it, I would like to do a little more focus on the land use section, and maybe, we also, because I think these are critical elements too, we do one of these action charts, if you will, or action matrices for the open space, and we do one for natural resources too, and that those things, I think those things might inform each other really nicely.
Yeah.
and Jim, Jack gave me a bunch of surveys. I'll scan them on Tuesday and email them to you
Oh, great.
for your team to compile the paper surveys.
Great.
All right. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make the motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Did we, not public comment? Oh, no. Okay,
He deferred.
Second.
We've been trying to wring it out of him, but he. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Jack, aye. Emil, aye. Kristen?
aye.
Aye. Have we lost Rosie? Are you and I? Where's David? David
They
gone?
left. They left with the community character.
Okay, we stand adjourned. It's 8:21.
Thank you all
John.
very much. It was a great evening.
Thank you very much. That's good.